What if the junk food you mocked turned out to be fresher, more customizable, and harder to stop eating than expected? That is the uncomfortable surprise waiting inside one ordinary Chipotle bowl. Europeans may arrive carrying every cliché about American fast food, but what happens when rice, grilled meat, salsa, beans, and guacamole refuse to fit the stereotype? Sometimes one forkful is enough to make an old opinion suddenly feel very expensive. Burrito bowl of the first surprise is that the food people expected to dismiss in 5 seconds often looks nothing like the version they had already judged in their heads. The phrase, American fast food, can arrive in Europe carrying a whole suitcase of assumptions, because international coverage tends to favor the loudest examples. Oversized sodas, towering burgers, fried everything, and portions photographed from angles that make lunch look like a construction project. Then a Chipotle burrito bowl lands on the counter, and the stereotype suddenly has to explain why there is grilled chicken, rice, beans, fresh salsa, lettuce, corn, cheese, and guacamole sitting right in front of it. And that difference matters because the American idea of convenience is not always the same as the European one. In Paris, a quick lunch might mean a jambon beurre from a bakery. In Berlin, it could be a doner eaten between errands. In Rome, pizza al taglio does the same job with almost no ceremony. Those options are excellent, precisely because they are simple and familiar. Chipotle takes another route. It turns convenience into something highly personal, where the meal changes according to the person holding the tray. That can feel unexpectedly generous. At the counter, nobody acts offended because someone wants extra corn, less rice, 2 kinds of salsa, or no cheese at all. The bowl is assembled openly, ingredient by ingredient, almost like a deli line, with the confidence of a backyard cookout. Americans barely notice this because customization is woven into everyday life here, from coffee orders to sandwich shops. For visitors used to meals where the kitchen makes most of the decisions, the amount of control can feel almost luxurious. And then there is the portion. A burrito bowl can look like somebody invited Thanksgiving to lunch and told it to dress casual. Yet the size is only half the story, because American food culture also treats leftovers with remarkable practicality. Eating half now and saving the rest for later is completely normal. That large bowl is not necessarily a dare. Sometimes it is simply tomorrow's lunch already sitting beside today's. This is where the old junk food label begins to wobble. A person can certainly build a heavy bowl with sour cream, cheese, guacamole, and generous portions. But that is exactly the point. The customer can also build a lighter one, with beans, vegetables, salsa, and a smaller serving of rice. The meal is not hiding behind a wrapper. The ingredients are visible, the choices are visible, and the responsibility is visible too. That is a very American kind of freedom, and it is easy to understand why it leaves such a strong impression. The country often gets reduced abroad to its loudest excesses, while daily life here is usually far more practical, flexible, and comfortable than the caricature suggests. A simple burrito bowl does not need to prove that America is perfect. It does something more convincing. It shows how ordinary American life can be generous, convenient, and surprisingly thoughtful without making a big speech about itself. Sometimes all it takes to challenge a stereotype is a plastic fork and one very full bowl. Barbacoa is where the whole fast food argument starts getting inconvenient, because there is nothing especially rushed about meat that earns its flavor slowly. The irony is delicious. A restaurant built for speed serves something whose appeal comes from patience. That contradiction is exactly what makes the American fast casual model so interesting, because it takes a cooking idea associated with long preparation and makes it available on an ordinary weekday without turning lunch into a 2-hour event. The attraction is not simply that the meat tastes rich. It is the way American food culture has become very good at compressing effort without completely erasing character. A customer can walk in during a 30-minute lunch break and still get something with the deep, savory profile people normally associate with food that has been cooking far longer than the customer has been standing in line. That is a clever little piece of American engineering, only this time the machinery happens to involve a fork. Compare that with Madrid, where slow-cooked meats often belong to a more traditional sit-down rhythm, or with southern France, where braised dishes are commonly tied to leisurely meals rather than quick service counters. Those traditions are wonderful because they protect the idea that certain flavors deserve time. America looked at the same problem and asked a different question. Why should the diner also need 2 hours just because the meat did? That mindset helps explain why places like Chipotle become habit-forming. The pleasure comes from getting restaurant-style depth without restaurant-style ceremony. Smoky meat, rice, beans, and salsa can be assembled in the time it takes someone in New York to realize their subway train has been delayed again. There is no reservation, no waiter, no need to organize the rest of the afternoon around lunch. The food fits around life instead of demanding that life fit around the food. Chipotle's scale shows how powerful that formula became. By the end of 2023, the company reported more than 3,400 restaurants, the overwhelming majority in the United States. That kind of expansion does not happen because millions of people suddenly become fascinated by aluminum bowls. It happens when a routine becomes easy enough to repeat and satisfying enough not to feel like a compromise. And barbacoa captures that better than almost anything else on the line. The flavor is bold enough to feel like a proper meal, yet the experience remains almost absurdly efficient. Americans have a particular talent for taking something that once belonged to a special occasion and making it available on a Tuesday between emails. Sometimes that creates excess, but sometimes it creates access, and those are not the same thing. For a European visitor used to separating quick from carefully cooked, that can be the real surprise. American convenience is often portrayed from abroad as a race to make everything cheaper and faster. In reality, one of its most attractive forms is the opposite, figuring out how to save the customer time without making the food feel like time was never spent on it. That is why barbacoa can become the dangerous order. Once lunch tastes is slow cooked while moving this fast, the sandwich waiting back home suddenly has serious competition. Carnitas tells a much bigger American story than a bowl of pork has any right to tell, because the real attraction is not simply the meat. It is the strange American talent for taking a regional food tradition, dropping it into the middle of everyday life, and watching millions of people adopt it until nobody thinks twice about ordering it between a dentist appointment and a Target run. That cultural mixing is one of the reasons eating in America can feel unexpectedly exciting to visitors. The United States has been absorbing Mexican culinary influence for generations, especially across California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and the Southwest. According to the 2020 U.S. Census, more than 62 million Americans identified as Hispanic or Latino, representing 18.7% of the population. Those communities did not simply add a few spicy dishes to the national menu. They helped reshape what an ordinary American lunch could look like. Carnitas is a perfect example because its roots are unmistakably Mexican, traditionally associated with pork cooked slowly until tender, yet in the United States it has escaped the category of foreign specialty. Someone in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Colorado, or Massachusetts can walk into a fast casual restaurant and order carnitas without treating the meal like an international expedition. That is much less ordinary than Americans sometimes realize. Walk through many neighborhoods in Paris and the everyday quick food landscape still leans heavily toward baguette sandwiches, crepes, kebabs, pastries, and familiar French cafe staples. In Rome, pizza al taglio, rhythm. Both cities have become far more internationally diverse, of course, but America operates on another scale because immigration has repeatedly pushed foods from immigrant communities straight into the national mainstream. The American lunch counter can sometimes look like the United Nations figured out how to accept Apple Pay. And carnitas becomes especially compelling because it delivers something that mass market food often struggles to preserve: identity. Pork that has been slowly cooked until it pulls apart easily carries texture and richness that feel miles away from the stereotype of identical patties moving down a conveyor belt. Put that beside rice, beans, salsa, and other ingredients, and the meal begins to show why American food is such a slippery phrase. America's food culture is powerful precisely because it keeps borrowing, adapting, mixing, and making room. There is also a psychological reason this becomes addictive. Familiarity removes the fear of trying something new. A customer does not need to understand the history of Michoacan cooking before tasting carnitas. The restaurant removes the ceremony, while the flavor quietly does the cultural introduction. After a few visits, something that once sounded unfamiliar becomes my usual. That transition is wonderfully American. In many countries, traditional cuisine is strongly connected to preserving recognizable national dishes, and there is real beauty in that continuity. America has a different advantage. Its national table is unusually comfortable with being unfinished. New communities arrive, new flavors become familiar, and yesterday's immigrant food can become tomorrow's Tuesday lunch. Carnitas therefore does more than make Chipotle taste interesting. It explains why American food can be so difficult to judge from overseas. The loudest stereotype says America flattens everything into fast food, while the everyday reality often does the opposite. It gives complicated culinary traditions enough access, convenience, and visibility to become part of ordinary life. That bowl of pork may look casual, But the story behind its popularity is America doing what America has always done best, making room at the table. Guacamole. Guacamole has a strange superpower in America. It can turn an ordinary lunch into something people suddenly care about. Nobody walks into Chipotle planning to write poetry about mashed avocado, yet the moment that green scoop lands on the bowl, the whole meal feels richer, fresher, and somehow more complete. That reaction is not accidental, because guacamole sits right at the intersection of flavor, texture, scarcity, and a very American idea of treating yourself without turning lunch into a formal occasion. The most interesting part is how quickly avocados went from something relatively unfamiliar in much of the country to something Americans now consume on a massive scale. USDA food availability data show that U.S. avocado consumption rose dramatically over the past few decades, climbing from roughly 2 pounds per person around the start of the 2000s to more than 8 pounds per person in recent years. That is an enormous cultural shift for one fruit, and it helps explain why guacamole no longer feels exotic in American everyday life. What makes it so addictive is the contrast. A burrito bowl already has warm rice, seasoned meat, beans, and salsa, but guacamole changes the texture of the entire meal. It is cool against hot ingredients, creamy beside crunchy vegetables, mild next to acidic salsa, and fatty enough to soften sharper flavors without burying them. The effect is almost like putting a leather recliner in the middle of a busy kitchen. Everything around it is still moving, but suddenly the experience feels more comfortable. That kind of combination is much less common in the everyday quick lunch culture of many European cities. In Paris, avocado certainly appears in cafes and modern brunch spots, but a traditional fast lunch still leans heavily toward baguette sandwiches, quiche, salads, or pastries. In Vienna, a quick meal may revolve around sausage stands, sandwiches, or bakery food. Those traditions have their own logic, but they rarely build a meal around this American habit of layering hot, cold, creamy, spicy, fresh, and crunchy elements into one container. That layering is exactly why the bowl keeps pulling the fork back. The appeal is not simply avocado tastes good, it is that guacamole acts like a reset button between bites. One forkful may be smoky and spicy, the next cooler and creamier, which prevents the meal from becoming monotonous. Food researchers often talk about sensory variety as one reason people continue eating, because changing textures and flavors keep the brain engaged. Chipotle did not invent that principle, but the burrito bowl puts it into practice with almost suspicious efficiency. And then there is the little American ritual attached to guacamole, paying extra for it. That small surcharge has become such a familiar part of Chipotle culture that guac is extra practically functions as a national inside joke. Yet people keep ordering it because the upgrade is immediate and visible. You are not paying for a mysterious premium package. You literally watch the green scoop land on your lunch. That says something charming about American food culture. People here are often willing to spend a little more when the reward feels personal, generous, and right there in front of them. Guacamole is not necessary, and that is precisely why it feels fun. It is the edible version of adding heated seats to a pickup truck. You can absolutely live without it, but after getting used to it, going back suddenly feels unnecessarily difficult. Queso blanco is the kind of food that exposes one of America's most charming habits. If something is already comforting, Americans will still ask whether it could become even more comforting with melted cheese. That sounds like a joke, but there is a serious cultural reason it works so well. Cheese occupies a completely different emotional place in American everyday food than it does in much of Europe. In France, Italy, Switzerland, or the Netherlands, cheese often arrives with a strong sense of identity. Brie, Comté, Parmigiano Reggiano, Gruyere, Gouda, and countless regional varieties are appreciated for origin, aging, texture, and tradition. The cheese itself can be the event. America often treats cheese differently at lunch. It becomes a collaborator. Queso blanco is not trying to sit politely on a board beside grapes and a small knife. It wants to run straight into rice, beans, meat, salsa, and whatever else is already happening in the bowl. That willingness to mix everything together is part of what makes American fast casual food so immediately enjoyable. Instead of protecting each ingredient from the others, the meal encourages them to bump into one another until the whole thing becomes richer than the individual parts. The numbers help explain why this instinct feels so natural here. USDA data show that per capita cheese availability in the United States has risen dramatically over the long term, from roughly 14 pounds per person in 1975 to more than 40 pounds in recent years. America did not simply learn to like cheese, it found an impressive number of excuses to put cheese somewhere nearby. Queso blanco succeeds because it does something especially clever to a burrito bowl. It changes the pace of eating. Rice and meat give structure, Salsa brings brightness. Beans add weight, but warm queso slips into all of the empty spaces. Every forkful suddenly feels softer and more connected. The bowl stops behaving like several ingredients, sharing rent, and starts acting like one actual meal. That texture is a major part of the appeal. Warm, creamy foods are strongly associated with comfort because they are easy to eat, rich in mouthfeel, and often linked with familiar home-style meals. In America, that sensory comfort shows up everywhere, from macaroni and cheese to queso dips at game day gatherings. The flavor is not complicated, but the emotional response can be immediate. This is where the comparison with Europe becomes especially interesting. In Paris, cheese might finish a meal. In Naples, mozzarella belongs naturally on pizza, but still follows a fairly recognizable culinary structure. In Switzerland, melted cheese certainly has legendary status through fondue and raclette, yet those dishes are usually experiences in themselves. America takes the molten cheese idea and casually inserts it into Tuesday lunch without requiring candles, reservations, or an alpine chalet. That is very American. The pleasure comes from lowering the ceremony while keeping the reward. Queso blanco also explains why food like Chipotle becomes easy to crave again later. The brain remembers contrasts well, and warm creamy cheese sitting beside spicy salsa, smoky meat, and cool toppings creates several sensations at once. A plain bowl can satisfy hunger. Queso gives the same bowl personality. And perhaps that is the deeper appeal outsiders sometimes miss when they reduce American food to excess. America is certainly generous with richness, but it is also unusually good at making pleasure convenient. The country takes a flavor associated with celebration, comfort, or sharing, and makes it available during a lunch break for a few extra dollars. No ceremonies required, and nobody needs to dress up for melted cheese. That may sound small, but everyday pleasures are often exactly what people remember most about a place. Queso blanco does not ask to be sophisticated. It simply arrives warm, creamy, unapologetically generous, and ready to make an ordinary bowl feel like somebody cared enough to add the good stuff. Sofritas is where the old stereotype about American fast food runs into something it probably did not expect. Tofu with actual personality. That matters because one of the easiest assumptions to make from outside the United States is that American quick service food is built almost entirely around beef, bacon, cheese, and portions large enough to require their own zip code. That image exists for a reason, but it leaves out how aggressively the American market responds when enough customers ask for something different. Sofritas is a perfect example of that flexibility, because Chipotle introduced the tofu-based protein nationally in 2014 after testing it in selected markets. The interesting part is not simply that a vegetarian option exists. Europe has plenty of vegetarian food, and cities like Berlin, Amsterdam, and London have strong plant-based scenes. The difference is how the American mainstream absorbs those choices and places them right beside the traditional ones without making the customer feel as though they have entered a separate category. That is a very American kind of convenience. Someone ordering sofritas does not have to find a specialty restaurant, study a different menu, or accept that the meatless option will be one lonely salad sitting in the corner like it lost a bet. The tofu goes into the same bowl with the same rice, beans, salsa, guacamole, and toppings, and it receives the same amount of attention as everything else on the line. The scale behind this trend is substantial. According to the Good Food Institute and Plant-Based Foods Association, U.S. retail sales of plant-based foods reached roughly $8 billion in 2022. The category has faced ups and downs since then, but that figure still shows how far plant-based eating moved beyond a tiny niche. In America, once a preference becomes large enough, businesses tend to compete for it with impressive speed. That is part of what makes American food culture feel so alive. In Berlin, plant-based eating often carries a strong identity of its own, with dedicated vegan cafes and restaurants woven into the city's food scene. In Amsterdam, vegetarian menus are common and increasingly sophisticated. America often takes another route. Instead of asking customers to choose between a regular restaurant and a special one, mainstream chains simply expand the definition of regular. Sofritas captures that shift beautifully. The tofu itself also explains why people come back. It is crumbled rather than served as a bland block, and it is seasoned so the texture absorbs spice and sauce. That makes it behave less like a substitute and more like an ingredient designed for the bowl from the beginning. The appeal is not based on pretending tofu is steak. It works because it does something different. That distinction matters. Americans are often accused of turning every food trend into marketing, but the more interesting story is how quickly everyday life adapts. A dietary choice that once required research can become something you order during a lunch break without thinking about it. No ceremony, no speech, no need to announce that the table is entering a new era. You just point at sofritas and keep moving down the line. There is something deeply appealing about that normality. It suggests that American abundance is not only about having more food, sometimes it is about having more ways to belong at the same table. And for a country so often caricatured as rigidly attached to meat in excess, a spicy tofu bowl sitting comfortably in the mainstream is a wonderfully quiet rebuttal. Steak, there is a reason the steak tray at Chipotle can make the whole counter smell more serious. Before anyone debates calories, authenticity, or whether fast casual food deserves respect, the scent of beef hitting a hot grill has already made a fairly persuasive opening statement. That reaction taps into something deeply rooted in American food culture. The grill is not merely cooking equipment here, it is practically social infrastructure. Backyard cookouts, tailgates, summer block parties, roadside diners, steakhouses, county fairs, and family gatherings have spent generations teaching Americans to recognize the flavor of browned meat as the smell of something good about to happen. Beef still occupies a remarkable place in that culture. USDA supply data have generally put American beef availability in recent years at around the high 50-pound range per person annually. That does not mean every American is eating steak every Tuesday, of course, but it shows why grilled beef remains such a familiar language across the country. Chipotle speaks that language in a surprisingly compact format. The fascinating part is not that Europe lacks excellent steak. France can answer with steak frites, Florence has bistecca alla Fiorentina, and Spain has spectacular grilled beef traditions in the Basque Country and Galicia. Those meals, however, often give the meat center stage. A proper steak arrives as the main event, and the rest of the plate knows its supporting role. The American burrito bowl treats grilled steak differently. Here, the meat joins a crowded neighborhood of rice, beans, corn, salsa, lettuce, cheese, and whatever else has been invited. Instead of demanding a white tablecloth and 20 uninterrupted minutes of attention, steak becomes something you can eat from a cardboard bowl while checking whether your parking meter is still alive. That casualness is exactly what makes it interesting. America has an unusual ability to democratize foods that once carried a little ceremony. Steak can still mean a reservation and a serious wine list on Saturday night, but on Wednesday afternoon it can also mean charred pieces of beef scooped onto lunch in under a minute. The experience does not cheapen the pleasure, it simply removes the dress code. And flavor explains why people remember it. High heat creates browning through the Maillard reaction, producing the roasted, savory aromas people associate with seared meat. In a burrito bowl, those browned edges become even more noticeable because they are surrounded by ingredients that are softer, cooler, brighter, or more acidic. Salsa wakes the beef up, rice catches the juices, and beans make the entire thing feel substantial enough to carry someone through an afternoon without requiring emergency cookies at 3 o'clock. There is also something distinctly American about refusing to force quality and convenience onto opposite teams. In many European cities, a quick lunch and a steak lunch still occupy noticeably different mental categories. A worker in Paris might grab a baguette sandwich quickly, while steak frites suggest sitting down properly. In Florence, nobody is realistically expecting a bistecca alla Fiorentina to appear between 2 conference calls. America looks at that separation and behaves like somebody at Home Depot who has just discovered a larger toolbox. Why choose? Put the grill behind the counter, cook the beef in batches, cut it into pieces, and suddenly one of the most recognizable pleasures of American cookout culture fits into a weekday lunch. That may be the deeper reason steak works so well at Chipotle. It takes something emotionally familiar to Americans and makes it almost ridiculously accessible, while visitors get to experience a side of the country that headlines rarely explain very well. American food is often portrayed as loving size for the sake of size. Steak at a burrito counter suggests something more interesting. Americans also love taking a good thing, removing unnecessary ceremony, and making sure ordinary people can enjoy it on an ordinary day. That is less flashy than the stereotype, but considerably harder to resist. Maybe the real surprise was never Chipotle itself, but how quickly one ordinary American meal can crack open a much bigger idea. Behind the burrito bowl is a culture built on choice, convenience, generosity, and the freedom to make something your own. That is, the America stereotypes rarely capture. If you enjoyed seeing everyday American life through a fresh set of eyes, subscribe to the channel and tell us below, which Chipotle order would you hand to a first-time European visitor?